I never knew what I was afraid of until I came down here. Being this far underwater for this long, without any contact to the world above, has been the hardest thing I've ever had to endure. Had it not for me being paired up with an old friend, this would have been unbearable. I've heard many divers talk about fighting to keep their sanity down here. I know that working as a diver on a deep-sea oil rig is one of the most dangerous occupations known to man, but Phil and I tell us we can't do something, that's probably what we're going to try to do. It's more of a curse than a blessing most times. I tightened the last valve I had to check for the day, and I was about to head back to our group quarters. All clear on my end, about to head back to base, I said on the radio. Bet I'll beat you there, Phil said back. I looked out across the darkness and couldn't see a damn thing. Being on the bottom of the ocean for a project for months at a time pays extremely well, and it's the only reason why I do it. I'm not afraid of the ocean nor the dark, but being engulfed in complete and utter darkness on the bottom of the ocean, I found that's a terribly different story. There's the fact that you literally cannot see a thing without a beam with you. And even with the brightest light you can find sometimes, the particles in the ocean make a cloud that basically makes the light reflect back into your eyes, effectively blinding you. Most times, you're unable to make out your own hand directly in front of your face. The creatures that we know are down here with us are terrifying enough, and there's enough time in the darkness to allow your mind to create its own monsters. Some that even though you try to convince yourself are fake, end up being very real indeed. I followed my line back to the group quarters, and I saw both the glow of our base and the dark water start to appear, as well as the faint light of Phil's torch growing brighter. Dinner for the evening was the usual: boxed mashed potatoes, soup, and stale chips with bottled water. A meal we had become accustomed to over the last few weeks, and that we'd have on repeat for months to come, unless we spiced it up and ate our pre-made boxed noodles instead. "What I'd give to be above water right now," said Phil. "It just doesn't feel the same down here. There's so much I feel like I'm missing out on." He continued, "I know that Lauren and the kids are okay. I just feel like people forget about us. You know?" "Don't be ridiculous," I joked back. "Those kids adore you. Lauren is somehow into you, and I have no idea how you landed that." Phil looked blankly back at me for an uncomfortable amount of time without saying anything. Then as I watched, I saw his eyes widen and a look of pure terror appear on his face, all the while seeming unable to wake up or even move. "Phil?" I said softly. "Dude, you're freaking me out, man. Come on." "Phil!" I yelled. A bit of drool started to form at the corner of his mouth. I jumped from my chair and ran quickly to his side of the table, shaking it. "Phil, wake up, man!" Suddenly he gasped, as if he had not taken a breath for what seemed like that entire time, and his eyes locked with mine as he grasped at me like he was falling, and I needed to catch him. He grabbed my hand and pulled it close to his chest as a heave. "Tell me there's more time!" Phil screamed directly in my face, his eyes wide and skin pale like the blood had run completely out of his body. Then, just as suddenly as that happened, his body relaxed and he looked at me confused. "Mike? What's wrong? Are you okay?" he asked. His voice had went back to its normal tone, and he was looking at me as if I was the one acting strange. I let go of his hand and stood up. "Are you fucking kidding me right now? Do not play this shit with me on the bottom of the ocean, you dick!" I shouted at him, shoving him as he sat in his chair. "You know I gotta keep you on your toes," Phil said. Grabbed his bottled water and chugged the last few drinks of it. "I'm really wiped from today, man. Think I'm gonna hit it for the night. Besides, we got an even longer one out there tomorrow." He cleaned up his trash and left the small commons area, then made his way across the small base to the ladder that climbed up to his bunk. "Good night, bud. Another day closer to going home," Phil said as he slid the door closed to his tiny sleeping quarters. From what I know about the sickness you can get from being in these kind of depths, it can be both physically and mentally challenging to keep your right mind down here. I decided it was probably a good idea to get some rest as well, as he was right about the day we had ahead of us tomorrow, and I obviously had been working too hard and thinking way too much about my current circumstances. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about the life I'd led till then. I thought about the fact that I never was lucky enough to have a family of my own. Thought about the fact that if something happened to me, I honestly didn't know if anyone would miss me, besides Phil. I don't know how much time had passed. Maybe it was 20 minutes, maybe it'd been hours. But just as I had drifted into a deep sleep, my eyes opened and I was jolted awake by the sound of the entire quarter shifting. "Phil!" I yelled across the quarters as I braced myself against my bed and the wall. All I heard was silence. The kind of silence that starts to build and gets so loud that it becomes deafening. Boom! The noise happened again, and this time it knocked me to the floor. I grabbed my high beam flashlight and aimed it out the window of our quarters. The murky sediment in the water just caused the light to reflect back at me, and all I could see was nothing. All I could hear was the slow drag of what sounded like a nail being dragged down a huge chalkboard. It was something digging into the metal of our underwater headquarters. I wasn't sure what the something was, but this was no nightmare. This was happening. Boom! The entire base shook again, and this time I could hear the steel shell of the underwater headquarters start to bend and shift under the pressure from the water and from whatever was hitting it from the outside. I was able to escape my pod and made my way across the quarters. "Phil!" I screamed. "What is going on?" I reached his pod and forced open the door. His bed sat empty and his flashlight and gear were gone. I ran to my gear and popped open our radio case to try and call him on the radio. "Phil, our base is taking hits from something in the water. Where are you? Phil, come in." I called on the radio for what seemed like forever, although it couldn't have been more than 30 seconds to a minute. I heard nothing back except the crackling of the radio waves. I sat down and felt my chest begin to tighten. I was nervous. I'd never been in a situation like this before. Resurfacing time at these depths would take 8.5 days, and with whatever was going on right now, I had no way to do anything but try to survive it, if my heart would let me. I wasn't sure if I was having a panic attack, a heart attack. I didn't know what was going on as I struggled to catch my breath. I began to breathe deeply, trying to calm myself down as I searched our base with my flashlight, looking for any sign of Phil. I just had to keep moving. Boom! This time it's louder. I couldn't believe I was faced with this situation. How did I get here? Where was Phil? I realized that I couldn't just sit there. I had to try to do something. I grabbed my scuba gear and my torch and headed into the water. "Phil!" I screamed over the radio. "Phil, there is something out here. You've got to get back to HQ." In the darkness surrounding the small shelter, I could see next to nothing, even with the brightest light I had. As I surveyed any damage I could make out, I noticed several large dents that had been made as if a giant fist had outright punched at the metal roof of our underwater quarters, trying to cave it in. I also saw drag marks. It looked like a sharp piece of metal had dug into the shell of the HQ, trying to slash it open. Our tethers that we have secured to the structure were glowing so that they would be easier to see, and as I circled around our base, I noticed Phil's line had been attached and was leading off into the darkness. Relieved, for whatever reason, I made my way toward the direction the line was pointing and tried to make contact on the underwater radio. "Phil, what are you doing out here, man? This is not funny." I heard silence back, just the static of the radio. As I followed the line, I saw Phil's outline in the water just in front of me. There was a light that seemed to be coming from the water far ahead of us that was very faint, but as we got closer to it, particles in the water started to reflect that light source even more. It started to light up our surroundings little by little. "Phil, wait for me. We can't just wander off into the ocean," I said on the radio. Phil did not answer. He forged on ahead of me, and I tried to walk the ocean floor faster, tried to swim, tried to do anything I could do to catch up to him. But he was somehow able to stay ahead of me no matter how hard I tried. All I saw was his outline advancing toward this light that had appeared, and suddenly he stopped moving. I approached him and felt the light intensify. Never had I experienced anything like this. This light ripped through my being as if I were naked, as if I weren't wearing all of the scuba gear, the wetsuits, but vulnerable in front of it as if it was a conscious being. I realize that sounds incredibly strange, but I can't describe it any other way. I noticed that I was now gaining ground on Phil and was close enough to reach out for him. I'll never forget the way his eyes looked when he turned around. It was as if he knew everything that had happened in the past, everything that would happen in the future, and like he was okay with that. Like total peace had come over him. Through the glass of our scuba gear, I could see him smiling. He grabbed both my arms and looked directly in my eyes. And over the radio, I heard him say, "This wasn't your fault. You have more time. You gotta wake up now." Mike! Mike, can you hear me? My eyes struggled to adjust to the blinding light, and I felt pain rip through my body like I'd been struck by lightning. Every joint, every fiber of my being almost felt like it was on fire. As the room became more clear, I could see that I was in a medical facility. The blinding lights in the white room seared against my brain as if setting off a high-frequency tone. Where am I? What's going on? I asked, gripping the lines connected to my body, feeling the IV in my arm. Captain Mike Hatcher, you are at Echo Base 1. You've been in a coma for a little over a month, but you survived an attempt on your life. A woman's voice echoed through the room as she stepped into my field of vision. My name is Dr. Julie Meredith, and I've been overseeing you and your partner's care. My brain started to piece back the puzzle of what had happened to us. Ambushed on a recon mission, we had come under heavy fire and were unable to make contact. We were pinned down and were able to commandeer an enemy vehicle to try to make our escape, but all I remembered after that was the blast from whatever must have hit us. Whatever we hit. Suddenly, as if in a shocking wave restoring my memory, I saw the flashes of gunfire. I smelled the smoke from the fire and the rotting flesh. How are you feeling? Do you have any questions right now? Asked Dr. Meredith. I sat up as best I could in my bed, my thoughts racing as I formed the words. My chin quivered, and the tears formed in the corners of my eyes as my voice cracked. What about Phil? Corporal Myers didn't make it. I'm very sorry, Captain. She reached into her pocket and grabbed a folded up piece of paper from it. He was able to regain consciousness before he passed, and he had me write this down and asked me to give this to you if you woke up. Dr. Myers continued. He was insistent. He said it was important. She handed me the note and I took it. My eyes still adjusting to the light, I stared out the window of the hospital room, looking at the clouds in the sky that had formed, feeling the sadness creep in, knowing that it would never leave. Can you all give me a few minutes? I asked. Of course, Captain. Press the call button should you need anything. The nurses will be in to check on you shortly. Dr. Myers tucked the blankets around the bed as she walked away, and the two nurses with her followed after her, leaving the room. I was alone. I looked down at the crumpled piece of paper and unfolded it slowly. I read through the creases on the worn page. This wasn't your fault. You have more time. You gotta wake up now. I never knew what I was afraid of. Till right then.